I'm sure many of you get the reference I'm using in this video. It is of course a play on words of the Coen brothers' excellent 2007 movie, No Country for Old Men. For the unawares, No Country for Old Men is like movie Marmite. For the action-loving cinema addict looking for a classic western with easy distinctions between good and bad, it's seen as a strange, nonsensical and oddly structured film. For those of us who are more fond of symbology and metaphor, however, it's seen as something of a masterpiece. The movie revolves around a quote-unquote lucky roaming stranger who stumbles upon a large suitcase of money after a drug deal has gone wrong in the desert. Now he decides, given everybody's dead, to take the money. However, this opens up a world of hell for him. Rather than big dramatic shootouts and predictable plot lines, the movie has a constant, eerie tone as if a great, impending doom is afoot. That's symbolised by Javier Bardem's now infamous portrayal of psycho-assassin Anton Chigurh. The interesting thing about the movie is the impending doom is never really resolved. Main characters don't die in a blaze of glory, they are brutally killed quickly when you least expect it, so fast you didn't even see it coming, and all of this represents a new world of bizarre and unfathomable violence. This is all experienced through the eyes of the experienced and weathered good old boy cop Ed Tom Bell, played by the excellent Tommy Lee Jones. He is the stereotype of the good guy of old, yet in this life he becomes bemused, lost in a mad world of such pointless violence it doesn't fit into the morals of old he grew up with. The structure of his old world morality just doesn't fit the modern world, meaning he can't find the right answers to explain what's happening to himself. He ends the movie in a sort of catatonic state, dreaming about his long deceased good old boy father, a reunion with whom in death may well bring some sanity into a now strange, violent and senseless world. Now the reason I'm breaking all this down is because grandfather of the UK right, Peter Hitchens, wrote a piece in the Mail yesterday outlining his theory that the Southport killer was motivated by, or at least had his mind altered by, cannabis, which led to these savage murders. Now I'm sure we all know Peter Hitchens. At worst he's a truculent know-it-all who could start an argument in an empty room, and at best he's a prophetic voice of such perspicacity his reading of our culture really is second to none. In many ways the themes that you see on many right-leaning YouTube channels to this day, Peter Hitchens was talking about 20 years ago. Yet despite Peter's wisdom, his love of Britain, his almost encyclopedic political knowledge, his view that the actions of Axel Rudakubana can be put down to cannabis is an almost innocent take. It shows the world has moved on. Now, to be clear, I'm no defender of cannabis, especially when young people are taking it. I smoked it when I was young, it did me no favours, and it can mangle your mind. I also saw it drag friends into psychosis, and even took a family member of mine into harder drugs and eventually death. There is no doubt that the liberal mainstream treats our modern drug culture as one big fun joke, and fails to ever recognise the sheer damage that it causes. Peter Hitchens deserves credit for sounding that alarm for many years, often as a sole voice. Yet as I had to come to terms with growing up, my experiences with cannabis are not universal. There are millions upon millions of people who smoke it, and while I don't think it does anybody any favours, most of the time it turns people into couch potatoes rather than psychopathic child murderers. After all, the smoking of cannabis is so widespread, especially in British youth these days, that if it did create psychopathic murderers, we'd have a couple of Southports every day. But back to Peter, he has a history of saying that cannabis is a key factor in terror attacks. He said it with many of the Islamist terror attacks as well. Of course, the obvious counter to that is Islamic radical ideology is behind these attacks. Cannabis may be a minor dimension, but fundamentally, this isn't the core problem here. Of course, it's the same with Axel Rudakubana, but worse still, there's no proof that Rudakubana did even smoke cannabis, and even those who do, it often takes a couple of years of smoking to drive somebody psychotic rather than just once or twice. A much more likely explanation which led to Rudakubana's actions could be the alleged post-colonial and anti-Western literature that was found in his room. This speaks to the same impending doom that I mentioned in No Country for Old Men. It's something beyond our understanding, a violence from the third world that we've invited here. Even if we were to take drugs alone, there are far worse things than cannabis that young people are taking these days. Spice, a synthetic form of cannabis, LSD, crack, DMT, cocaine, mushrooms. All of these are available to young people now. When we look at the modern world, cannabis is just an oversimplified explanation to explain a world that doesn't make sense, a world of maimings, bombings, mass stabbings of children. Our old moral system cannot comprehend such insane level of violence. Case in point, I used to walk past the Blind Beggar pub in London on my way to work. It was where Ronnie Cray famously shot George Cornell in an underworld beef. Now, this location and event has been mythologized in London folklore, and that's because a murder back in the 60s was such a rare occurrence. Today, it's an almost daily occurrence. Nobody bats an eyelid in London if someone's murdered now. Of course, when you're in the grip of such violence, it makes sense to clamber for narratives that help us in explaining the world. And I suppose even Peter's is more advanced than the left-wing mainstream version. Of course, the mainstream media and the government give us constant reminders that diversity is a strength. It's always a strength. If you don't think it's a strength, there's something wrong with you. Even when our children are murdered in cold blood, it's still a strength. The harsh reality is that narratives of cannabis causing this on the one side and the naive utopian cliches of diversity as our strength on the other both serve to hide a very brutal reality. And that's that we've entered a new world that's extremely violent, unpredictable, that doesn't make any sense. Of course, the fear for many is that if we don't adhere to the simplistic narratives that explain the modern world to us, we'll end up in a semi-catatonic state like Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, not understanding the world around us. And that gives us two choices. We can dive into the simplistic narratives like a cocoon and just hope everything will be okay, probably. Or we can prepare ourselves for the coming world mentally and spiritually. That's very much a mission on my Substack. I'm trying to reawaken our tradition to give us stronger roots and more stability in dealing with the modern chaos. Do check that out down below if you're interested. I'm intending to flesh it out more over the coming year. On top of that, do let me know your thoughts down below and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.